Everyone gets a gift this Christmas, my boss announced. While all my coworkers got $35,000, I only got $5,000. When I questioned it, my boss snapped, "Be grateful I even remembered you." I didn't say another word. That night, the factory power grid went down. The production robots froze. 5 years of dedication to precision manufacturing felt worthless as Derek Thompson crushed my Christmas spirit with his cruel dismissal. The humiliation burned deeper than any physical pain as $20 million worth of machinery stood motionless in the darkness. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I stared at the frozen assembly line, my breath visible in the rapidly cooling air. December in Ohio always brought bitter cold, but nothing compared to the chill running down my spine as footsteps echoed through the empty factory floor. Derek's voice boomed across the production floor before I even saw his silhouette approaching through the shadows.
"Carrie, what the hell did you do?"
His accusation sliced through the mechanical silence like a blade. The man who had just humiliated me hours earlier now stood pointing his finger directly at my chest, his face twisted with manufactured rage. "I didn't do anything," I stammered, confusion washing over me as I tried to process his sudden appearance. "I came back to run the final quality checks on tomorrow's shipment. The power just went out while I was reviewing the inspection reports." Derek's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the motionless machinery. 27 industrial robots worth nearly $1 million each stood frozen mid-assembly, their mechanical arms suspended in awkward positions like sculptures in a modern art museum. The silence felt deafening after spending 5 years surrounded by the constant hum of productivity.
"Security footage shows you were the last person to access the control systems,"
Derek declared, pulling out his phone to make a call.
"I'm placing you on immediate suspension pending a full investigation into this sabotage."
My heart hammered against my ribs as the word sabotage echoed through the cavernous space. "That's ridiculous! I've been running quality control for 5 years without a single incident. Why would I destroy the equipment that supports my livelihood?"
"Maybe because you're bitter about your bonus,"
Derek suggested with a cold smile that made my stomach churn.
"Maybe you thought you'd teach the company a lesson about appreciation."
The accusation hit me like a physical blow. After dedicating countless overtime hours to ensuring product quality after catching manufacturing defects that could have cost the company millions in recalls after proving my worth, time and again Derek was painting me as a vindictive saboteur. "You know that's not true," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the distant hum of emergency lighting. "I would never hurt this company." Derek's phone call connected, and I listened in growing horror as he spoke to what sounded like corporate security.
"Yes, we have a situation at the Ohio plant. Employee sabotage caused a complete production shutdown. I need a full investigation team here first thing tomorrow morning." As Derek ended his call, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The security camera that normally monitored this section of the factory floor was dark, its red recording light conspicuously absent. For a facility that prided itself on comprehensive surveillance, the timing of this malfunction felt far too convenient. "Derek, look around," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. This wasn't sabotage. The power grid failure affected the entire industrial district. "Check the news check with the utility company. This is bigger than just our factory." But Derek wasn't listening. He was already walking toward the exit, leaving me alone with the silent machines and the growing realization that I was being set up for something much worse than a Christmas bonus dispute. "Don't come back tomorrow, Kari,"
Derek called over his shoulder without turning around.
"Security will escort you off the property if you try. And I'd recommend finding yourself a lawyer because criminal charges are definitely on the table."
The heavy metal door slammed shut behind him, leaving me in the eerie quiet of the darkened factory. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows across the production floor, and I found myself studying every detail of the scene, trying to understand how a simple power outage had transformed into a career-ending catastrophe. Something wasn't adding up. In 5 years of working at precision manufacturing, I'd never seen Derek arrive at the plant this quickly after an emergency. He lived 45 minutes away in the suburbs, yet somehow he'd appeared within 30 minutes of the power failure. Almost as if he'd been expecting something to happen. I pulled out my phone to document the scene, taking photos of the frozen robots and the failed electrical systems. If Derek wanted to play games with my career, I'd make sure to have evidence of my own. The timestamp on my photos would prove exactly when I'd arrived and what condition I'd found everything in. As I prepared to leave, I noticed something else that struck me as odd. The quality control computer system I'd been working on when the power failed had automatically saved my inspection reports, but several files that should have been in the system were mysteriously missing. Reports I'd completed just days earlier had vanished without explanation. The more I thought about Derek's behavior, the more questions arose. Why had he immediately assumed sabotage instead of investigating the obvious power grid failure? Why was the security camera conveniently malfunctioning? And why did he seem more concerned with blaming me than with assessing the actual damage to the production line? Walking to my car through the empty parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that Derek's quick arrival and immediate accusations were part of something larger. The Christmas bonus humiliation had stung, but this felt like a calculated attack designed to destroy my reputation and eliminate me from the company entirely. The $30,000 difference in our bonuses suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the potential career destruction I was facing. Derek had transformed a simple question about fair compensation into a criminal allegation that could follow me for the rest of my professional life. As I drove home through the darkened streets of suburban Ohio, I made a mental note to contact my coworkers first thing in the morning. If Derek was planning to frame me for industrial sabotage, I needed to understand exactly what I was up against and why he was so determined to destroy my career over a bonus dispute. Sleep proved impossible that night. I spent hours researching power grid failures, industrial sabotage laws, and employment rights, trying to understand the legal nightmare Derek had thrust upon me. By sunrise, I'd filled 3 pages with questions that demanded answers, starting with the mysterious disappearance of my quality control files. At 7 in the morning, I called Marcus Wellington, my closest colleague in the engineering department. Marcus had worked at precision manufacturing for 8 years longer than anyone except Derek himself, and his reputation for honesty had earned him respect throughout the company.
"Carrie, I heard about last night,"
Marcus said, his voice heavy with concern.
"Derek sent an email to all department heads claiming you'd been suspended for equipment tampering, but something doesn't feel right about his story."
"What do you mean?" I asked, gripping the phone tighter as hope flickered in my chest. "Well, for starters, the power failure affected 6 other manufacturing facilities in our district. Ohio Edison confirmed it was a grid overload caused by increased heating demand during the cold snap. Derek's sabotage theory doesn't make sense when the entire industrial zone lost power simultaneously." Marcus's words validated what I'd suspected the night before. Derek's immediate jump to criminal accusations seemed increasingly suspicious when viewed against the broader context of a regional power outage.
"There's something else,"
Marcus continued, lowering his voice as if someone might be listening.
"I've been reviewing some of Derek's recent vendor contracts, and I found irregularities that concern me. Payments to companies I've never heard of, purchase orders for materials that never arrived, approval signatures that look questionable."
My pulse quickened.
"What kind of irregularities?"
"The kind that suggest someone might be creating fake vendors to funnel money out of the company.
I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past 18 months, maybe more. I only discovered it because Derek asked me to verify some technical specifications, and when I tried to contact the suppliers, half of them didn't exist. The implications hit me like a freight train. If Derek had been embezzling company funds through fraudulent vendor contracts, my question about the Christmas bonus could have triggered panic about increased scrutiny of financial irregularities. Framing me for sabotage would shift attention away from his potential theft while eliminating the person most likely to discover quality control violations related to non-existent materials. "Marcus, I need you to document everything you found," I said, my mind racing through the possibilities. If Derek is stealing from the company, he might have deliberately caused the power failure to destroy evidence on the computer servers. "That's exactly what I'm thinking," Marcus replied. "The timing is too convenient. The power surge didn't just shut down the production line, it fried several database servers that contained financial records and quality control documentation. Derek was here within minutes of the failure, almost like he knew it was going to happen. I felt the pieces of a complex puzzle beginning to align. Derek's early arrival, his immediate accusations, the missing quality control files, and now evidence of financial fraud created a pattern that pointed toward deliberate sabotage, but not by me. "We need to talk to other people who might have noticed Derek's behavior," I suggested. "If he's been stealing from the company, there might be other employees who've seen suspicious activity." "I already called Janet Rodriguez from security," Marcus said. "She's willing to meet with us this afternoon. Janet mentioned that Derek has been asking her to delete specific surveillance footage over the past few months, claiming it contained proprietary information that needed protection from industrial espionage." The revelation about deleted surveillance footage sent chills down my spine. If Derek had been selectively removing security recordings, he could have been covering up evidence of his own criminal activity while creating gaps in the documentation that would make it difficult to prove my innocence. "Where should we meet?" I asked, already grabbing my coat and keys. Janet suggested the diner on Route 19 about 3 miles east of the plant. She gets off work at 2 o'clock and she doesn't want anyone from the company seeing us together. After ending the call with Marcus, I spent the morning researching corporate embezzlement cases, trying to understand how employees typically steal from their employers and what evidence prosecutors need to prove financial crimes. The parallels between Derek's behavior and documented fraud cases were striking and alarming. Most embezzlement schemes involve creating fake vendors or inflating legitimate contracts, exactly what Marcus had discovered in Derek's paperwork. The perpetrators often have access to financial systems and approval authority which Derek possessed as plant manager. And when employees discover irregularities, the criminals frequently retaliate by filing false accusations or attempting to discredit potential witnesses. At 1:30 that afternoon, I arrived at the Route 19 diner, a classic American establishment with red vinyl booths and checkered linoleum floors that had been serving the local community for decades. Marcus was already waiting in a corner booth, nursing a cup of coffee and studying a manila folder filled with documents. Janet Rodriguez arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, her security uniform still crisp despite completing an overnight shift. At 52 years old, Janet had worked in corporate security for over 20 years, and her reputation for integrity was unquestioned throughout the company. "Before we start talking," Janet said, sliding into the booth across from Marcus and me, "I need both of you to understand that what I'm about to share could cost me my job if Derek finds out. But I can't stay silent when I know an innocent person is being framed." The gravity in Janet's voice confirmed my suspicions that Derek's scheme extended far beyond a simple bonus dispute. "We understand the risks," I replied. "But if Derek is committing crimes, we have to expose the truth before he destroys more lives." Janet opened her own folder and pulled out a handwritten log that documented months of unusual requests from Derek. Starting in June, Derek began asking me to delete specific segments of surveillance footage.
He claimed it showed proprietary manufacturing processes that could be stolen by competitors if the recordings fell into the wrong hands.
How often was he making these requests? Marcus asked, leaning forward with intense interest. At least twice a week for the past 6 months. Janet replied.
Always the same story about protecting trade secrets, always accompanied by written authorization from corporate headquarters. I thought it was legitimate until I started noticing patterns in the deleted footage.
What kind of patterns? I pressed, sensing we were approaching crucial information.
The deleted segments always showed Derek's after-hours activities in the factory, times when he was supposedly conducting security inspections or equipment maintenance, but the footage showed him photographing manufacturing blueprints and accessing computer systems that weren't part of his normal responsibilities.
The implications were staggering.
Derek hadn't just been stealing money through fake vendor contracts, he'd been systematically stealing intellectual property by photographing proprietary manufacturing designs and selling them to competitors. The power failure that destroyed computer servers would have eliminated digital evidence of his theft, while the deleted surveillance footage removed visual proof of his criminal activities.
Janet, do you still have copies of any of the deleted footage? Marcus asked hopefully.
That's the thing,
Janet said with a slight smile.
Derek doesn't understand our backup systems. When I delete footage from the primary servers, it automatically creates archived copies on our disaster recovery systems. Those archives are only accessible by corporate security headquarters, but they exist.
For the first time since the power failure, I felt a surge of genuine optimism.
If archived surveillance footage showed Derek stealing intellectual property, it would not only prove my innocence but expose the real criminal behind the factory's sabotage.
There's more, Janet continued.
Derek's been blackmailing other employees who've discovered irregularities in his operations. Linda Patterson from the production supervisory team found discrepancies in safety inspection reports, and Derek threatened to fire her if she reported the violations. Robert Chen in accounting questioned suspicious financial transfers, and Derek implied that Robert's immigration status might be investigated if he continued asking questions. The scope of Derek's criminal enterprise was becoming clear. He'd created a web of fear and intimidation to silence potential witnesses, while systematically looting the company's financial and intellectual assets. My Christmas bonus question had threatened to unravel his entire operation.
"We need to contact Linda and Robert,"
I said, feeling determination replace the despair that had consumed me since the power failure. If Derek has been threatening multiple employees, we can build a case that shows his pattern of criminal behavior.
Marcus nodded in agreement.
And we need to document everything before Derek realizes we're investigating. If he's willing to frame you for sabotage, he might escalate to more serious crimes if he feels cornered.
As we prepared to leave the diner, Janet handed me a business card with her personal phone number.
"Carrie, I want you to know that most of us at the plant believe you're innocent. Derek's accusation doesn't match your character or your track record. We're going to help you prove the truth no matter what it takes." Walking to my car, I felt the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. This was no longer just about clearing my name or recovering my career. It was about stopping a criminal who had been systematically destroying lives and stealing from hardworking people for months. Derek had made a crucial mistake when he chose me as his scapegoat, because I wasn't going to disappear quietly into the night. The next morning brought devastating news that shattered any remaining hope for a simple resolution. I was preparing breakfast when my phone rang, displaying my younger brother Tyler's number. The panic in his voice immediately told me that Derek's retaliation had escalated far beyond my own employment troubles.
"Carrie, the FBI just left my apartment,"
Tyler said, his words tumbling together in frightened confusion. "They're saying I helped you hack into the factory's computer systems. They're talking about federal cybercrime charges that could send me to prison for 20 years. My coffee mug slipped from my hands, shattering on the kitchen floor as the full scope of Derek's strategy became apparent. Tyler worked as an information technology specialist for a regional bank, and his computer expertise made him a perfect target for Derek's expanded sabotage narrative. "Tyler, slow down and tell me exactly what the agent said." I replied, my voice steady despite the terror clawing at my chest. My 26-year-old brother had spent 5 years building a respectable career in cybersecurity, and false federal charges could destroy everything he'd worked to achieve. They said surveillance footage showed me visiting the factory last month, and that phone records proved we'd been planning some kind of cyber attack together. They have a warrant to search my computer and my work files. Kari, I'm going to lose my job even if they don't find anything because the bank can't employ someone under federal investigation. I closed my eyes, remembering Tyler's visit to the factory in November. He'd stopped by during my lunch break to return a borrowed textbook and had spent 10 minutes touring the production floor while I finished some paperwork. Derek was twisting an innocent family visit into evidence of criminal conspiracy. "Listen to me carefully," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "Don't answer any more questions without a lawyer present. Don't let them search anything without proper warrants. And don't admit to any technical knowledge about industrial systems because they're trying to build a case based on your computer background." Tyler's breathing was rapid and shallow, classic signs of a panic attack. "Carrie, what if they plant evidence on my computer? What if Derek has already hacked my systems to create fake proof I don't have money for a federal criminal defense attorney?" The questions highlighted Derek's calculated cruelty. He wasn't just framing us for crimes we didn't commit, he was targeting Tyler's livelihood and future in a way designed to pressure me into accepting blame for the factory sabotage. Derek understood that I would sacrifice myself to protect my brother from federal prosecution. "We're going to fight this together. I promised already planning my next moves. I'm going to contact Marcus and Janet, and we're going to expose Derek's real crimes before he can destroy our family." After hanging up with Tyler, I immediately called Marcus to update him on Derek's escalating attacks. Marcus's anger was palpable through the phone as he absorbed the news about federal charges against an innocent young man whose only crime was having a sister who'd asked questions about Christmas bonuses.
"Carrie, this proves that Derek is desperate,"
Marcus said after I'd finished explaining Tyler's situation.
"Innocent people don't frame family members unless they're trying to cover up massive criminal activity. We need to accelerate our investigation before Derek has time to destroy more evidence or hurt more people."
"What did you find out from Linda and Robert?" I asked, hoping for information that could help Tyler as well as myself.
"Both of them confirmed Derek's pattern of intimidation and fraud," Marcus replied. "Linda discovered that Derek has been falsifying safety inspection reports for months, approving equipment that should have been flagged for maintenance. Robert found evidence of at least 12 fake vendor contracts, totaling over $400,000 in fraudulent payments. The numbers were staggering, but I needed concrete proof that could convince federal investigators that Derek was the real criminal." "Do Linda and Robert have documentation of Derek's threats and the financial irregularities?" "Linda kept copies of the original safety reports before Derek forced her to change them, and Robert printed financial records before Derek had access to delete them. We're building a solid evidence file, but we need something that directly connects Derek to the power grid sabotage." "What about Janet's archived surveillance footage?" I asked, grasping for any advantage in the increasingly complex legal battle. "Janet contacted her supervisor at corporate security and they're reviewing the archived files, but it could take several days to retrieve and analyze months of deleted footage. Meanwhile, Derek is building criminal cases against you and Tyler based on fabricated evidence." The timing was working against us. While we slowly assembled proof of Derek's crimes, he was actively destroying lives with false accusations supported by his authority as plant manager.
Federal investigators were more likely to believe a respected manager's claims about employee sabotage than allegations of complex corporate fraud from suspended workers.
Marcus, I need to ask you something difficult, I said, steeling myself for a potentially dangerous request. Would you be willing to return to the factory and look for evidence that Derek deliberately caused the power failure? If we can prove he sabotaged his own equipment, it would explain everything else.
That's risky, Marcus admitted.
If Derek catches me investigating, he might retaliate against me the same way he's attacking you and Tyler. But Linda has legitimate access to the electrical systems as a production supervisor, and Robert can review financial records related to recent electrical work.
The plan was forming in my mind as Marcus spoke. Instead of direct confrontation with Derek, we could use our allies' existing authority to gather evidence from their normal work responsibilities. Linda could identify electrical anomalies that might indicate deliberate sabotage, while Robert could trace any suspicious payments to electrical contractors or equipment suppliers. Coordinate with Linda and Robert to conduct their investigations simultaneously, I suggested. If Derek has been planning this sabotage for weeks or months, there should be evidence in multiple systems that he couldn't completely eliminate. Over the next several hours, our informal investigation team worked systematically to uncover Derek's criminal activities. Linda's analysis of the electrical systems revealed that critical surge protectors had been deliberately disabled in the days before the power failure, while Robert's financial review showed payments to a non-existent electrical contractor just weeks before the sabotage. By evening, we had assembled compelling evidence that Derek had orchestrated the power failure as part of a broader scheme to steal company assets and eliminate employees who threatened to expose his crimes. The missing quality control files, deleted surveillance footage, fake vendor contracts, and deliberately disabled safety equipment created a pattern that even federal investigators couldn't ignore. But Derek wasn't finished with his attacks. At 9 o'clock that night, Tyler called with even more alarming news about the expanding scope of the federal investigation.
Carrie, the FBI agents came back with additional warrants,
Tyler said, his voice thick with exhaustion and fear. They're claiming that our phone conversations over the past few days prove we're continuing to plan criminal activities. They're monitoring our communications and treating every conversation as potential evidence of ongoing conspiracy. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Derek had anticipated that I would investigate his false accusations, and he'd used my natural response to build additional evidence for his fabricated case. Every phone call with Tyler, every meeting with Marcus and Janet, every attempt to prove my innocence was being twisted into proof of guilt.
Tyler, from now on, we can only communicate through lawyers,
I said, fighting back tears of frustration and anger. Derek is using our family relationship as a weapon against both of us. As I hung up the phone, I understood that Derek's strategy was more sophisticated and ruthless than I'd initially realized. He wasn't just framing me for sabotage, he was systematically destroying everyone I cared about to force my submission. The $30,000 bonus dispute had escalated into a federal criminal case that threatened to imprison my innocent brother and destroy the lives of every employee who'd tried to help me. But Derek had underestimated my determination and the loyalty of my colleagues. While he'd been building his web of lies and false accusations, we'd been documenting his real crimes with evidence that would ultimately expose the truth. The battle for justice was just beginning, and Derek was about to discover that framing innocent people carries risks that even the most calculating criminal can't anticipate. The emergency meeting took place at Linda Patterson's house on a gray Saturday morning, the kind of overcast December day that matched the somber mood of our gathering. Linda lived in a modest ranch-style home in a middle-class neighborhood about 15 minutes from the factory, and her living room became the headquarters for our investigation into Derek's criminal empire. Linda, at 38 years old, had supervised production operations for 6 years, and commanded respect throughout the plant for her technical expertise and unwavering integrity. Her discovery of disabled safety equipment had provided crucial evidence of Derek's sabotage, but the personal cost was becoming apparent in the worry lines around her eyes and the tension in her shoulders. "Before we start," Linda said, serving coffee to the 5 of us gathered around her dining table, "I need everyone to understand what we're risking. Derek has shown he's willing to destroy innocent people to protect himself. If we continue this investigation, we're all potential targets for retaliation." Marcus nodded grimly from his seat near the window, his laptop open to a spreadsheet documenting Derek's financial crimes. "Linda's right about the risks, but we can't let Derek frame Carrie and Tyler for crimes they didn't commit. And we can't let him continue stealing from the company while threatening other employees." Janet Rodriguez, still wearing her security uniform from an overnight shift, pulled out a thick folder of documentation. "I've been in law enforcement for 25 years before joining corporate security, and I've never seen a case this complex. Derek isn't just committing multiple crimes, he's created an entire system of intimidation and fraud that affects everyone at the plant." Robert Chen sat quietly at the far end of the table, his financial records spread out in neat piles organized by date and transaction type. At 41 years old, Robert's accounting background and attention to detail had made him invaluable in tracking Derek's embezzlement, but the stress was evident in his drawn expression and nervous gestures. "I've been analyzing Derek's financial activities for the past 3 days, Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What I've found is worse than simple embezzlement. Derek has been systematically draining company resources while building false cases against employees who might expose him." "How much money are we talking about?" I asked, dreading the answer but needing to understand the full scope of Derek's theft. Robert consulted his spreadsheet before responding. "Based on the fake vendor contracts and inflated purchase orders, I've identified Derek has stolen at least $600,000 over the past 18 months. But that's just the financial theft. The intellectual property he's been selling to competitors could be worth millions in lost competitive advantage." The numbers were staggering, but Marcus had uncovered even more disturbing information about Derek's long-term plans. "I managed to access Derek's computer yesterday while he was in meetings with federal investigators," Marcus said, lowering his voice despite being in Linda's private home. "What I found suggests that Derek is planning to disappear with company assets worth far more than $600,000. "What do you mean, disappear?" Linda asked, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. Marcus turned his laptop screen toward the group, revealing email correspondence between Derek and what appeared to be an overseas business contact. "Derek has been negotiating the sale of our entire manufacturing database to a competitor in Singapore. Technical specifications, customer lists, supplier contracts, production schedules, everything our company has built over 20 years of operation." "My God," Janet whispered, studying the email timestamps. "How much is he selling it for?" $300 million, Marcus replied, his words landing like physical blows around the room. "Derek plans to transfer the entire database to Singapore servers, then claim the power failure destroyed our computer systems beyond recovery. The insurance payout for lost data would be substantial, but Derek would disappear with both the insurance money and the payment from the Singapore buyers." The enormity of Derek's plan left everyone speechless for several minutes. This wasn't simple embezzlement or even industrial espionage. It was the complete destruction of our company disguised as an accident caused by employee sabotage. Derek intended to steal everything while framing innocent workers for crimes that would destroy their lives and careers. "When is this supposed to happen?" I asked, my voice hoarse with shock and growing anger. Marcus scrolled through the email chain, his expression becoming increasingly grim. According to his correspondence, Derek planned to complete the data transfer by New Year's Day.
The power failure accelerated his timeline because he's worried that the investigation might expose his activities before he can finish stealing everything. That's less than 10 days, Linda calculated aloud. If Derek succeeds, he'll destroy hundreds of jobs while escaping with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of his life. Janet stood up and began pacing Linda's living room, her law enforcement instincts clearly engaged. We need to contact federal authorities immediately. This isn't just corporate fraud, it's economic espionage that threatens national security. Singapore competitors gaining access to American manufacturing technology affects much more than just our company. But will they believe us over Derek? I asked the question that had been haunting me since Tyler's arrest. Derek has spent months building false evidence against me and my brother. He has the authority of management and the support of corporate investigators who think they're dealing with simple employee sabotage. Robert cleared his throat nervously before offering a suggestion. I think our best chance is to gather irrefutable proof of Derek's crimes before confronting him or the authorities. If we can document the Singapore transaction, trace the stolen money, and prove he sabotaged the factory, even Derek's management authority won't protect him. What kind of proof do we need? Marcus asked, already thinking about how to access additional evidence from factory systems. Financial records showing the money trail to Derek's personal accounts, Robert suggested. Communication logs proving his contact with Singapore buyers. Technical evidence that he disabled the safety equipment before the power failure. And most importantly, surveillance footage showing him stealing intellectual property. Janet nodded approvingly at Robert's systematic approach. I can work with corporate security to expedite the review of archived surveillance footage. If we can prove Derek was photographing proprietary documents, it supports everything else we've discovered. I can continue analyzing the electrical systems to build technical proof of deliberate sabotage, Linda offered. If Derek disabled surge protectors and overloaded circuits, there should be physical evidence that contradicts his claims about employee tampering. And I can trace additional financial irregularities while monitoring Derek's computer activities, Marcus added. If he's planning to complete the Singapore transfer soon, he'll need to access systems that I can document. As our roles became defined, I felt a surge of determination that had been absent since Derek's initial accusations. Instead of defending myself against false charges, we were building an offensive strategy to expose Derek's crimes and protect everyone he'd threatened or manipulated. There's something else we need to consider, I said, looking around the table at the people who'd risked their careers to help me. Derek's email correspondence suggests he's been planning this for months, which means the Christmas bonus incident was probably deliberate provocation designed to create a pretext for framing me. What do you mean? Linda asked, though her expression suggested she was already following my reasoning. Derek needed a scapegoat for the factory sabotage, someone with technical knowledge who could plausibly be blamed for the power failure. My question about the bonus disparity gave him the perfect opportunity to portray me as a disgruntled employee with motives for revenge. Marcus's eyes widened as he absorbed the implications. So, Derek has been manipulating events to frame you since before the power failure even happened. The whole Christmas bonus scenario was theater designed to establish your supposed motive for sabotage. Which means Derek probably planned the exact amount of my bonus to create maximum humiliation and anger. I continued feeling pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. He wanted me to question the disparity so he could claim I was bitter and vindictive. The realization that Derek had orchestrated months of manipulation to frame me for his own crimes filled the room with renewed anger and determination. But it also provided additional evidence of premeditation that could strengthen our case when we finally confronted the authorities. Derek made one crucial mistake in his planning, Janet observed with the confidence of someone who'd investigated complex criminal cases. He assumed that framing one person would prevent anyone else from investigating his activities. He didn't anticipate that employees would work together to expose the truth. And he definitely didn't expect his victims to fight back.
I added, feeling strength returning to my voice for the first time in days. Derek is about to discover that destroying innocent lives comes with consequences he never considered. As our meeting concluded, each team member committed to specific investigative tasks that would build an irrefutable case against Derek within the next week. The stakes were enormous: Tyler's freedom, hundreds of jobs, and $300 million in stolen assets. But our alliance had transformed from defensive desperation into offensive determination. Derek had underestimated the power of people working together to fight injustice, and his carefully constructed criminal empire was about to crumble under the weight of evidence gathered by the very employees he'd tried to intimidate and destroy. Monday morning arrived with shocking news that demonstrated Derek's escalating desperation and willingness to destroy innocent lives. I was reviewing financial documents with Robert when my phone rang, displaying a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end identified himself as Special Agent David Morrison from the FBI's Domestic Terrorism Task Force. "Ms. Williams, we need you to come in for questioning regarding serious allegations that have been brought to our attention," Agent Morrison said in a tone that suggested the situation had escalated far beyond simple industrial sabotage. "We've received credible information that you've made threats against the precision manufacturing facility that could constitute acts of terrorism." My blood turned to ice as Derek's strategy became clear. He wasn't content with framing me for equipment sabotage. He was now alleging that I'd threatened to blow up the entire factory. Federal terrorism charges would not only destroy my life, but also eliminate any credibility I might have when exposing his crimes. "Agent Morrison, I've never made any threats against anyone," I said, my voice steady despite the terror clawing at my chest. "Someone is providing you with false information as part of a scheme to frame me for crimes I didn't commit." "That's what we intend to determine," the agent replied. "We have recordings of phone conversations where you allegedly discussed plans to cause additional damage to the facility. We also have witness statements from plant management describing your increasingly erratic and threatening behavior." The mention of recorded phone conversations sent chills down my spine. Derek must have been monitoring my communications, possibly through company phone systems or electronic surveillance. Every conversation I'd had with Marcus, Janet, Linda, and Robert could have been twisted to support allegations of criminal conspiracy. "I want to cooperate with your investigation," I said carefully, "but I need to contact an attorney before answering any questions. And I want to provide you with evidence that the real criminal in this case is Derek Thompson, who has been systematically stealing from the company while framing innocent employees." Agent Morrison's tone became more formal and suspicious. "Ms. Williams making false allegations against law enforcement personnel or company management could be considered obstruction of justice. I strongly advise you to focus on addressing the serious charges against you rather than making unsupported claims about other people." After ending the call, I immediately contacted Marcus to warn him about Derek's escalation to terrorism allegations. Marcus's reaction confirmed my worst fears about the scope of Derek's false evidence. "Carrie, I think Derek has been recording all of our conversations," Marcus said, his voice tight with anxiety. "Yesterday, I noticed that my office phone had been adjusted, and there are new electronic devices in the factory that weren't there last week. Derek must have installed surveillance equipment to monitor anyone investigating his activities." "What about our investigation?" I asked. "Do we still have time to gather evidence before Derek completes his frame-up?" Marcus's response revealed the true urgency of our situation. "I accessed Derek's computer again this morning, and what I found is terrifying. Derek's Singapore contact confirmed that the data transfer is scheduled for this coming Friday. Derek plans to disappear over the weekend with $300 million while you and Tyler face federal terrorism charges." The timeline was devastating. Derek had accelerated his criminal plan while simultaneously building an elaborate terrorism case designed to discredit anyone who might expose his theft. Federal investigators would be so focused on alleged terrorist threats that they'd ignore evidence of corporate embezzlement and intellectual property theft.
Marcus, we need to implement our evidence-gathering plan immediately, I said, desperation creeping into my voice. If Derek succeeds this week, hundreds of people will lose their jobs while innocent people go to prison for crimes they didn't commit. I've already contacted Linda and Robert, Marcus replied. Linda found additional proof that Derek sabotaged the electrical systems, and Robert discovered that Derek has been transferring money to offshore accounts for the past 6 months. But we're running out of time to present this evidence before Derek's final theft.
What about Janet's surveillance footage? I asked, hoping for a breakthrough that could expose Derek's real activities. Janet's corporate security contact expedited the review process, and they found exactly what we needed. The archived footage shows Derek photographing proprietary documents, accessing computer systems outside his authority, and meeting with people who aren't company employees. But corporate security wants to investigate internally before involving outside law enforcement. The corporate security approach could be disastrous if Derek learned about the investigation before we could present evidence to federal authorities. Derek's management position and apparent cooperation with terrorism investigators would give him credibility that our allegations might not overcome.
We can't wait for corporate security, I decided.
Derek is planning to complete his theft in 4 days, and he's built terrorism charges that could send me and Tyler to prison for decades. We need to force a confrontation that exposes his crimes before he can escape. Marcus was quiet for several minutes before responding.
Kari, what you're suggesting is extremely dangerous. If we confront Derek directly, he might escalate to violence or complete his theft immediately. But if we don't act soon, he's going to succeed in framing you while stealing everything.
The impossible choice was becoming clear. Waiting for proper authorities to investigate Derek's crimes would take weeks or months' time that Tyler and I didn't have while facing federal terrorism charges. But confronting Derek directly could trigger desperate actions that might make the situation even worse.
Let me think about this, I said.
Maybe there's a way to expose Derek's crimes without giving him time to retaliate or escape. That afternoon, Linda called with information that changed our entire strategy.
Carrie, I found something that Derek doesn't know about a backup surveillance system that was installed during last year's security upgrade.
The system operates independently of the main security network, and Derek doesn't have access to delete or modify its recordings.
What does the backup footage show? I asked, hoping for evidence that could resolve the entire crisis.
Everything, Linda replied with satisfaction. Derek photographing documents, meeting with people who aren't employees, accessing computer systems at odd hours, and most importantly, deliberately disabling safety equipment the day before the power failure. This footage proves that Derek sabotaged his own facility.
Linda, that's incredible, I exclaimed.
But how do we get this evidence to federal investigators without Derek interfering?
Janet has a contact at the FBI field office who specializes in corporate crimes, Linda explained.
If we can get the backup footage to this agent directly along with Robert's financial evidence and Marcus's documentation of the Singapore plan, we might be able to expose Derek before his terrorism allegations destroy your life. The plan was risky, but represented our best chance for justice. If federal investigators saw irrefutable proof of Derek's crimes before he could complete his theft and frame up, they might realize that the terrorism allegations were part of his criminal scheme to eliminate witnesses and escape prosecution.
When can we make contact with Janet's FBI contact? I asked.
Tonight, Linda replied. But we need to be extremely careful about communications. Derek is monitoring everything, and if he realizes we're approaching federal investigators, he might accelerate his timeline or take more drastic action. As evening approached, our alliance prepared for the most dangerous phase of our investigation. Derek had transformed a simple Christmas bonus dispute into a complex web of terrorism allegations, federal charges, and corporate theft worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But his elaborate criminal scheme was about to collide with evidence he never knew existed, and investigators who specialized in exactly the kinds of crimes he'd been committing. The final confrontation was approaching, and Derek was about to discover that framing innocent people for terrorism comes with risks that even the most sophisticated criminal mastermind cannot control or anticipate. Tuesday evening found me sitting in my car outside the FBI field office, my hands trembling as I reviewed the evidence that could either save my life or seal my fate as a federal terrorism suspect. Special Agent Sarah Chen Janet's contact, who specialized in corporate crimes, had agreed to meet with me despite the terrorism allegations Derek had fabricated. Her willingness to listen represented the first hope I'd felt since this nightmare began. Agent Chen, a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and an authoritative presence, greeted me in a secure conference room equipped with recording devices and computer monitors. Unlike Agent Morrison, who'd focused solely on Derek's terrorism accusations, Agent Chen seemed genuinely interested in understanding the complete picture of events at Precision Manufacturing. Ms. Williams, before we discuss the allegations against you, I want you to know that certain aspects of this case have raised questions among federal investigators. Agent Chen began her tone professional but not hostile. Industrial sabotage that coincides with extensive corporate theft is unusual, and we've learned to examine such cases carefully for evidence of false accusations. Relief flooded through me as Agent Chen's words suggested that federal investigators weren't completely convinced by Derek's terrorism narrative. Agent Chen, I have extensive evidence that Derek Thompson has been systematically stealing from Precision Manufacturing while building false cases against employees who discovered his crimes. Agent Chen activated the recording equipment and gestured for me to begin presenting my evidence. Over the next 2 hours, I methodically outlined Derek's embezzlement scheme, his theft of intellectual property, his planned sale of company assets to Singapore competitors, and his elaborate frame-up designed to eliminate potential witnesses. These are serious allegations, Agent Chen said after reviewing Robert's financial documentation and Marcus's evidence of the Singapore transaction. But the most compelling proof would be surveillance footage that shows Derek engaging in the criminal activities you've described. That's exactly what we have, I replied, producing the backup surveillance recordings that Linda had discovered. This footage shows Derek sabotaging his own facility, stealing proprietary documents, and meeting with people who aren't company employees. Agent Chen's expression grew increasingly grim as she reviewed the surveillance footage on her computer monitor. The backup recordings provided irrefutable proof of Derek's criminal activities, including clear images of him photographing manufacturing blueprints and deliberately disabling electrical safety equipment. Ms. Williams, this footage directly contradicts the terrorism allegations that have been made against you, Agent Chen observed. If Derek Thompson sabotaged the facility himself, then his claims about employee terrorism are clearly false. But I need to understand why he would fabricate such elaborate accusations. Derek is planning to disappear this weekend with $300 million stolen from the company. I explained, my voice growing stronger as Agent Chen absorbed the evidence. The terrorism charges against me and my brother are designed to discredit us as witnesses, while Derek completes his theft and escapes to Singapore. Agent Chen studied the timeline of events cross-referencing Derek's activities with the dates of his accusations against Tyler and me. The pattern is consistent with sophisticated criminal enterprises that use false accusations to eliminate threats. But Derek Thompson doesn't know about this backup surveillance system. He has no idea it exists, I confirmed. Derek deleted footage from the main security network, but he couldn't access the backup system that documented all of his criminal activities. Agent Chen made several phone calls to coordinate with other federal investigators. And I could hear fragments of conversations about financial crimes, intellectual property theft, and international economic espionage. The scope of Derek's criminal enterprise was becoming apparent to law enforcement officials who specialized in exactly these types of sophisticated crimes. Ms. Williams, we're going to need you to participate in a controlled operation to gather additional evidence, Agent Chen explained after completing her phone calls. If Derek is planning to complete his theft this Friday, we need to document his final criminal acts while ensuring he doesn't escape with stolen assets. What kind of operation? I asked, both eager to help and nervous about potential dangers. We want you to return to the factory tomorrow and confront Derek about the Christmas bonus disparity, Agent Chen outlined. Derek's reaction to your presence will be recorded, and if he attempts to threaten you or fabricate additional false evidence, we'll have documentation of his criminal behavior. The plan was risky but necessary to build an irrefutable case against Derek. Will I be protected if Derek becomes violent or tries to frame me for additional crimes? Federal agents will be monitoring the situation from concealed positions, Agent Chen assured me. If Derek attempts to harm you or destroy evidence, we'll intervene immediately. Your safety is our primary concern. Wednesday morning arrived gray and cold, matching my mood as I prepared for what could be the most dangerous day of my life. The plan required me to walk into Derek's office and confront him about the bonus disparity, while federal agents recorded his reaction from hidden surveillance positions throughout the factory. I arrived at Precision Manufacturing at 9 o'clock, my heart hammering as I approached the main entrance for the first time since my suspension. Several co-workers recognized me and offered supportive words, their encouragement strengthening my resolve to expose the truth about Derek's crimes. Derek's office was located on the second floor of the administrative building, overlooking the production floor, where $27 million worth of equipment still stood frozen from his deliberate sabotage. As I climbed the stairs, I could hear Derek's voice through his open door, apparently speaking on the phone about finalizing arrangements for some kind of transfer. "Derek, I need to talk to you," I announced, standing in his doorway with as much confidence as I could project. Derek's face went pale when he saw me, and he quickly ended his phone conversation. "Carrie, you're not supposed to be here. I told you that security would escort you off the property if you returned. I want to understand why my Christmas bonus was $30,000 less than my coworkers received," I said, following the script Agent Chen had prepared. 5 years of perfect performance reviews, and you gave me 15% of what everyone else got. Derek's reaction was immediate and revealing. Instead of discussing the bonus calculation, he began making threats about additional federal charges and criminal prosecution. "Kari, you're making your situation much worse by being here. The FBI is building a terrorism case against you, and your presence at the factory could be considered evidence of continued criminal intent." "Derek, I've never committed any crimes," I replied, allowing genuine emotion to enter my voice. "But I'm starting to understand that someone has been stealing from this company while framing innocent employees for sabotage." Derek's expression shifted to one of barely controlled panic, and he reached for his phone as if to call security or law enforcement. "Kari, I'm warning you to leave immediately before I have you arrested for trespassing and making terrorist threats." "Derek, I know about the Singapore transaction," I said, delivering the line that Agent Chen had identified as crucial for exposing Derek's criminal enterprise. "I know about the $300 million you're planning to steal, and I know you sabotaged the power grid to destroy evidence of your embezzlement." Derek's face turned ashen, and for several seconds he appeared unable to speak. When he finally responded, his voice was strained and desperate. "I don't know what you're talking about, and I'm calling the FBI right now to report that you've returned to the factory to make additional terrorist threats." Derek, the backup surveillance system recorded everything. I continued following Agent Chen's instructions to force Derek into making incriminating statements. "There's footage of you photographing proprietary documents and deliberately disabling safety equipment before the power failure." Derek's panic became visible as he realized that his careful criminal plan was unraveling.
There is no backup surveillance system. I personally deleted all footage that could contradict the evidence against you. The admission that Derek had deliberately deleted surveillance footage was exactly what Agent Chen needed to prove obstruction of justice and evidence tampering. Derek's statement also confirmed that he'd been systematically destroying evidence to support false accusations against innocent employees.
Derek, why did you frame me for sabotage when you're the one who's been stealing from the company? I asked,
pressing for additional admissions while federal agents recorded Derek's responses. I didn't frame anyone, Derek shouted, his composure completely shattered. You questioned my authority over bonus allocations, and when the power failure happened, it was obvious that you were responsible. I'm protecting this company from employees who think they can challenge management decisions. Derek's explanation revealed the underlying psychology of his criminal behavior. He'd interpreted my legitimate question about bonus disparity as a challenge to his authority, triggering an escalating cycle of retaliation that culminated in federal terrorism charges designed to destroy my life and eliminate me as a potential witness to his theft.
Derek, I know you're planning to disappear to Singapore with stolen company assets.
I said, delivering the final provocation that Agent Chen had scripted. I know you're transferring $300 million worth of proprietary information to overseas competitors.
Derek's reaction exceeded even Agent Chen's expectations.
Instead of denying the Singapore transaction, Derek began making detailed threats about what would happen to me if I continued investigating his activities. His statements included admissions about financial transfers, intellectual property theft, and his intention to complete the asset transfer before federal investigators could discover his crimes.
Derek,
you just confessed to multiple federal crimes while threatening a witness, Agent Chen announced, entering Derek's office with her badge displayed. Derek Thompson, you're under arrest for corporate embezzlement, intellectual property theft, evidence tampering, making false accusations, and conspiracy to commit economic espionage. Derek's expression shifted from rage to complete shock as additional federal agents appeared to secure the scene and prevent him from destroying evidence. The controlled operation had succeeded beyond our most optimistic expectations, with Derek providing recorded confessions to crimes that would result in decades of federal imprisonment.
Agent Chen, what about the charges against Tyler and me?
I asked as Derek was handcuffed and advised of his constitutional rights. All charges against you and your brother are being dropped immediately, Agent Chen replied with satisfaction. Derek's recorded statements prove that the terrorism allegations were false accusations designed to cover up his own criminal activities. As Derek was escorted from the factory in federal custody, I felt a mixture of relief, vindication, and exhaustion that marked the end of the most terrifying week of my life. But the complete resolution of Derek's criminal enterprise would require additional investigation and legal proceedings that could take months to conclude. 3 months later, I stood in the boardroom of Precision Manufacturing as the new plant manager, looking out over the production floor where $27 million worth of equipment hummed with renewed productivity. The frozen robots that had symbolized Derek's sabotage now operated at full capacity, manufacturing products that had restored the company's reputation and financial stability. Derek Thompson's criminal empire had collapsed completely under federal investigation. Asset seizure operations recovered $250 million from offshore accounts, while Singapore authorities cooperated with American law enforcement to prevent the transfer of stolen intellectual property. Derek himself was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for crimes that included embezzlement, economic espionage, evidence tampering, and making false accusations against federal investigators. Tyler had returned to his banking career with a clean record and a story that had actually enhanced his reputation as someone who'd stood up to sophisticated cyber criminals. The false accusations against him had been dismissed so thoroughly that his employer offered him a promotion to head their new cybersecurity fraud prevention department. Carrie, the quarterly production report is ready for your review, Marcus said, entering my office with a smile that reflected the dramatic improvement in workplace morale since Derek's removal. Marcus had been promoted to chief engineer, a position that utilized his technical expertise and his proven integrity during the investigation that exposed Derek's crimes. "Thank you, Marcus," I replied, accepting the report that showed productivity levels exceeding all previous benchmarks. "How are Linda and Robert adjusting to their new responsibilities?" "Linda loves being production director," Marcus replied. "She's implemented safety protocols that prevent the kind of sabotage Derek used, and employee satisfaction surveys show dramatic improvements in workplace culture. Robert's new position as financial compliance officer has eliminated the vulnerabilities Derek exploited for his embezzlement scheme. The transformation of precision manufacturing extended beyond individual promotions to fundamental changes in corporate culture. Janet Rodriguez now supervised a security department that prioritized transparency and employee protection over management authority. Her backup surveillance system had become the model for comprehensive oversight that prevented corporate crime while protecting legitimate business interests. Speaking of changes, Marcus continued, the Christmas bonus calculations for this year are complete. Everyone receives equal treatment based on performance metrics and seniority exactly the way it should have been last year. The mention of Christmas bonuses brought back memories of the moment when Derek's simple act of financial discrimination had triggered the investigation that exposed his massive criminal enterprise. My question about $30,000 in bonus disparity had ultimately prevented the theft of $300 million in corporate assets. Marcus, do you think Derek planned the bonus humiliation specifically to create a pretext for framing me? I asked a question that had puzzled me throughout the legal proceedings. The federal prosecutors believe Derek's embezzlement scheme required eliminating several employees who had access to financial or technical systems, Marcus explained. Your question about bonus fairness gave him the perfect opportunity to portray you as a disgruntled employee with motives for sabotage. But Derek didn't anticipate that his victims would work together to expose his crimes. I observed, feeling proud of the alliance that had brought justice to an impossible situation. Derek's biggest mistake was underestimating the integrity and determination of the people he tried to destroy, Marcus replied. He assumed that fear and intimidation would prevent employees from investigating his criminal activities. That afternoon, I received a phone call from Agent Chen, who had become a friend during the months of legal proceedings that followed Derek's arrest. Kari, I wanted to update you on some developments in Derek's case that you might find interesting. What kind of developments? I asked, curious about the ongoing federal investigation. Derek's cooperation with prosecutors has revealed an international network of corporate criminals who steal intellectual property and sell it to overseas competitors, Agent Chen explained. Your case has become the foundation for prosecuting dozens of similar crimes that affect American manufacturing companies throughout the Midwest. The revelation that Derek's crimes were part of a broader pattern affecting multiple companies added significance to our investigation. The evidence we'd gathered had contributed to a federal task force that was protecting American jobs and intellectual property from systematic theft by sophisticated criminal enterprises. Agent Chen, what's the long-term impact on companies like Precision Manufacturing? I asked, thinking about the broader implications for American workers and businesses. Cases like yours demonstrate that employees working together can expose and prevent corporate crimes that government agencies might never discover, Agent Chen replied. Your willingness to fight false accusations led to stopping theft that could have destroyed hundreds of jobs and compromised national economic security. As our conversation concluded, I reflected on the lessons learned during the most challenging period of my professional life.
Derek's criminal scheme had taught me that standing up for small injustices can expose massive crimes, that employee solidarity can overcome sophisticated intimidation, and that truth eventually prevails when people refuse to accept false accusations. The Christmas bonus dispute that had started this entire ordeal now seemed insignificant compared to the criminal enterprise we'd exposed and stopped. But Derek's $30,000 discrimination had been the thread that, when pulled, unraveled his entire web of embezzlement, intellectual property theft, and employee intimidation. That evening, I met Tyler for dinner at a restaurant near the factory, our first relaxed meal together since federal terrorism charges had threatened to destroy his life and career. Tyler's experience had matured him in ways that enhanced his cybersecurity expertise and his appreciation for justice.
Carrie, I've been thinking about what Derek's case teaches us about fighting powerful people who abuse their authority,
Tyler said as we reviewed menus and celebrated our family's survival of Derek's attacks. What conclusions have you reached? I asked, interested in Tyler's perspective on corporate crime and personal integrity. Derek's scheme succeeded for months because employees were isolated and afraid to challenge someone in a position of authority, Tyler observed. But when people work together and refuse to accept intimidation, even the most sophisticated criminals can be exposed and stopped. Tyler, that's exactly the lesson I hope other people learn from our experience. I agreed. Derek assumed that fear would prevent employees from investigating his crimes, but he underestimated the power of people working together for justice. Our dinner conversation covered the personal growth we'd both experienced during months of false accusations, federal investigation, and legal proceedings. The trauma of facing terrorism charges had strengthened Tyler's commitment to cybersecurity and his understanding of how technology could be used to both commit crimes and expose criminal behavior.
Carrie, do you ever regret asking Derek about the Christmas bonus disparity?
Tyler asked as we prepared to leave the restaurant.
Never,
I replied without hesitation. Derek's financial discrimination was wrong, and questioning it led to exposing crimes that could have destroyed hundreds of lives. Sometimes standing up for small injustices reveals massive corruption that requires exposure. As I drove home through the familiar streets of suburban Ohio, I thought about the employees who would benefit from the changes at Precision Manufacturing and the families whose jobs had been saved by exposing Derek's theft. The personal cost of fighting false accusations had been enormous, but the broader impact of stopping Derek's criminal enterprise justified every moment of fear and uncertainty. The story of Derek Thompson's criminal scheme and its exposure had become a case study used by federal law enforcement to train investigators in corporate crime and employee intimidation. Our experience demonstrated that ordinary workers, when they work together with integrity and determination, can defeat sophisticated criminals who abuse positions of authority. 6 months after Derek's sentencing, Precision Manufacturing had become one of the most successful factories in our region, with productivity levels, employee satisfaction, and financial performance that exceeded all previous benchmarks. The company's reputation for integrity and quality had attracted new customers and contracts that provided job security for our entire workforce. But the most important outcome was the lesson that every employee learned about the power of standing up for justice. Derek's scheme had taught us that questioning unfairness, even in small matters, can expose massive corruption. Fighting false accusations, even when they seem overwhelming, can reveal truth that protects entire communities from sophisticated criminals. My experience had shown that integrity and determination, supported by colleagues who refuse to accept intimidation, can overcome even the most elaborate criminal schemes. Derek Thompson had tried to destroy innocent lives to cover up his theft, but he discovered that people working together for justice possess power that no criminal mastermind can anticipate or control. The Christmas bonus that had started this entire ordeal was now just a memory, but the lesson it taught about fighting for fairness had transformed our workplace and our lives. Sometimes the smallest acts of courage can expose the largest crimes, and sometimes asking simple questions about justice can change everything. Derek's $30,000 discrimination had cost him $300 million, 25 years of freedom, and the destruction of a criminal enterprise that had threatened American jobs and national security. Justice had been served, lives had been saved, and the truth had prevailed because ordinary people had refused to accept corruption disguised as authority. Have you ever faced a situation where standing up for what's right seemed impossible but felt necessary anyway? I'd love to hear about your experiences with fighting injustice in the comments below. Your stories might inspire others who are facing their own battles against corruption and intimidation. Please, like this video if Derek's downfall gave you the same satisfaction it gave me, and subscribe to hear more stories about ordinary people who refuse to accept unfairness. Share this story with anyone who needs to know that truth and justice can prevail even against the most sophisticated criminals. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your voice matters when fighting for justice. Sometimes questioning small injustices can expose massive crimes, and sometimes standing up for fairness can change everything. Stay strong, stay honest, and never let powerful people convince you to accept corruption in silence.